The massive halls of Nexus Prime had never seen such panic. Council members from dozens of worlds rushed through the corridors, their faces showing the same expression of fear that had spread across the galaxy like a disease. The Zephyrian Empire was winning, and no one knew how to stop them. Ambassador Thrixon of the Centaurian Federation stood at the center of the great council chamber. His blue skin had turned pale, and his forearms shook as he held up the latest reports. 17 worlds had fallen in just 3 months. 17 entire civilizations, either dead or enslaved. The Kepler system will be next, Thrixon announced to the packed chamber. His voice echoed off the crystal walls. Our scouts report the Zephyrian fleet is already moving in that direction. Over 300 ships, including their flagship. Elder Korvac of the Altarian Republic rose from his seat. The old creature looked tired, his gray fur matted with worry. What about the defense fleets? Surely the combined might of our worlds can stop them. Thrixon shook his head. The Rigel Defense Force tried to make a stand last week. 47 ships against 60 Zephyrians. It lasted less than an hour. Their plasma cannons cut through our shields like they were made of paper. Murmurs of despair filled the chamber. Representatives from hundreds of worlds had come here looking for hope, for a plan, for anything that might save their people. Instead, they found only more bad news and fear. High Commander Valtash shows no mercy, continued Thrixon. He broadcasts the destruction of each world across subspace. He wants us to see what happens to those who resist. The lucky ones die quickly. The rest become slaves in his mining operations. A draconian diplomat stood up, his scales rattling with anger. What about negotiation? Surely we can find some common ground. We tried, Thrixon replied. The Zephyrians sent back our diplomat's head in a box. Silence fell over the chamber, like a heavy blanket. These were peaceful species, races that had solved their problems through talk and trade for thousands of years. War on this scale was something they read about in history books, not something they lived through. Elder Korvac cleared his throat. There is one option we have not discussed. All eyes turned to him. The Altarian was one of the oldest beings in the galaxy, having lived through the formation of the Council itself. If anyone had an idea, it would be him. The humans, he said. Simply. The reaction was immediate. Laughter erupted from several sections of the chamber. A vegan trade minister actually fell out of his chair. He was laughing so hard. The humans? Scoffed a Syrian general. Those primitive apes? They have been part of the galactic community for barely 50 years. Their ships look like they were built in a scrapyard. Their weapons are kinetic projectiles, added another voice, solid chunks of metal. No plasma, no antimatter, no gravitational disruptors. They might as well be throwing rocks. Elder Korvac waited for the laughter to die down. Perhaps, but they are the only species in known space that has never lost a war. They have never fought a real war, countered the Syrian general. A few. Pirate raids, some border disputes with smugglers. Nothing like this. Exactly my point, Korvac said quietly. Every other species in this chamber has been at peace for centuries. We have forgotten how to fight. But humans have been fighting each other for their entire history. They know war in ways we have forgotten. The chamber grew quiet again, but this time it was thoughtful rather than fearful. Several representatives were nodding slowly. Their military records are public, Korvac continued. I have studied them. Humans have fought continuously for 10,000 years. They have perfected the art of killing in ways that would horrify us. But perhaps that is what we need now. Thrixon looked uncertain. Even if we contact them, why would they help? Earth is far from Zephyrian space. They could simply ignore this conflict. Because, Korvac said with the ghost of a smile, humans have another trait that sets them apart. They cannot stand bullies. 3 days later, the human diplomatic vessel. UES Harmony received the Council's transmission. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, reading the message for the third time. His bridge crew waited quietly, knowing their captain well enough to recognize when he was making an important decision. Morrison was 52 years old, with gray hair and steady blue eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners. He had started his career fighting pirates in the outer systems, and worked his way up through pure competence and an unwillingness to give up. "Navigator Chun," he called to his second-in-command. "How long to reach Kepler 442? Lisa Chun checked her displays. She was young for her position, but Morrison trusted her completely. Her ability to find safe routes through dangerous space had saved their lives more times than he could count. 4 days at maximum hyperspace velocity, sir," she reported. "But, according to these reports, the Zephyrian fleet will be there in 3. Morrison nodded. "Engineer Rodriguez, how are our engines?" Pete Rodriguez looked up from his console. The chief engineer was a compact man who could fix anything with spare parts and determination. "Running at full capacity, Captain. We can push them harder if needed." Morrison studied the tactical data one more time. Over 300 Zephyrian ships, armed with weapons that had already destroyed entire fleets. Their flagship alone was larger than most space stations. By any reasonable measure, this was impossible. But Morrison had read enough history to know that impossible was just another word for something that had not been done yet. "Communications," he ordered. "Send a message to Earth Command. Priority Alpha." The bridge fell silent. Priority Alpha meant only one thing: war. "Tell them we need the fleet," Morrison continued. "All of it." His communications officer, a young woman named Beth Parker, hesitated. "Sir, should I include details about enemy strength?" Morrison shook his head. "They will read the tactical reports. Just tell them the Council has asked for our help, and we are going to give it." As the message shot through hyperspace toward Earth, Morrison looked around his bridge. These people trusted him to make the right decisions to keep them alive, to bring them home. In a few days, they would face an enemy that had never been defeated. But Morrison had one advantage the Zephyrians did not know about. Humans had been preparing for this fight their entire history. Every battle, every war, every conflict had been a lesson in how to destroy their enemies more efficiently. The Zephyrians were about to learn why humans were the only species that had never lost a war. The war room beneath the Rocky Mountains had not seen this much activity since the Martian Independence War 20 years ago. Fleet Admiral Karen Walsh stood before a massive holographic display showing the current position of every human ship. In space, red dots marked friendly vessels, while yellow indicated neutral territory. But it was the growing cluster of purple dots near the Kepler system that held her attention. Walsh was a woman who had earned her position through 40 years of military service. She had started as a lieutenant on patrol ships and fought her way up through every rank. Her short gray hair and stern face reflected a lifetime of making hard decisions that kept humanity safe. "How many Zephyrian ships?" she asked Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner, her tactical analyst. Turner was a thin man with nervous energy who lived and breathed military statistics. He could recite battle formations from memory and calculate odds faster than most computers. "Latest intelligence puts their fleet at 312 vessels, Admiral. Their flagship, the Deathbringer, is classified as a super dreadnought. Length, 4 kilometers. Crew, 50,000. Armament includes plasma cannons capable of glassing entire continents." Walsh nodded grimly. "And our available forces? 50 ships, Admiral. The entire First Fleet is ready for deployment." "Captain." Susan Blake's U.S. Liberty leads the formation, with the U.S. Constitution and U.S. Freedom as her wing commanders. Chief Petty Officer Rick Hamilton stepped forward from his position at the strategy table. Hamilton was the kind of man who understood. War at a level that went beyond books and simulations. He had served in every major human conflict for the past 30 years and possessed an instinctive grasp of tactics that made him invaluable. "Admiral, I have run the numbers," Hamilton said. "On paper, this should be impossible. The Zephyrians have us outnumbered 6-1. Their weapons have longer range and higher energy output. Their shields can absorb direct hits from antimatter torpedoes." Walsh raised an eyebrow, but Hamilton smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "But they have never fought humans. Every species they have conquered used the same basic strategy: long-range energy weapons, defensive screens, gradual escalation of force. They expect their enemies to fight like civilized beings." Turner pulled up tactical displays showing Zephyrian battle formations. Their standard attack pattern involves approaching in line formation, exchanging long-range fire until shields fail, then closing for the kill. Very predictable, very clean, very ineffective against humans. Walsh studied the enemy formations. After decades of military service, she could see the weaknesses that other species missed. The Zephyrians fought like duelists, not soldiers. They followed rules that humans had abandoned long ago. "What do we know about their command structure?" she asked. "Highly centralized," Turner replied. "High Commander Veltash commands from the Deathbringer. All major tactical decisions flow through him. Kill the flagship, and their fleet becomes disorganized." Hamilton nodded. "Classic weakness. They have never faced an enemy that targets leadership. First, most galactic species consider it dishonorable to specifically hunt command vessels. Humans do not have that problem," Walsh said flatly. "What about their sensor capabilities?" "Advanced in some ways, primitive in others," Turner explained. "They can detect energy signatures from incredible distances and track plasma weapon fire with perfect accuracy. But their systems are designed to identify threats based on energy output. They will classify our kinetic weapons as low-priority targets." Walsh turned to the fleet composition display. 50 human warships hung in space around Earth, each one representing years of research and development, guided by hard-learned lessons from human military history. They did not look impressive compared to the sleek, graceful vessels favored by other species. Human ships were blocky, functional, and covered with sensor arrays and weapon mounts that gave them a distinctly aggressive appearance. But appearance meant nothing. What mattered was capability. "Tell me about the Liberty." Walsh ordered. Turner highlighted the flagship on the display. "Captain Susan Blake's vessel. Modified Valiant-class heavy cruiser. Primary armament: 8 kinetic cannon batteries firing tungsten penetrator rounds at .7 light speed. Secondary systems include 60 missile tubes, electronic warfare suites, and close-in defense systems. The Zephyrians have never encountered kinetic weapons at those velocities," Hamilton added. "Their shields are energy-based. Solid matter traveling at significant fractions of light speed will punch right through." Walsh nodded. Human military doctrine had been shaped by 10,000 years of warfare on Earth. While other species developed energy weapons and defensive screens, humans had perfected the art of throwing rocks very fast and very accurately. The principle was ancient, but the execution was devastatingly modern. "Electronic warfare capabilities?" she asked. "Full spectrum," Turner replied. "Every human ship carries advanced computer intrusion systems. We have been studying Zephyrian communication protocols for months. Lieutenant Sarah Kim's cyber warfare division believes they can infiltrate enemy networks and create chaos in their targeting systems." Hamilton pulled up battle plans on the main display. "The strategy is simple, Admiral. We do not fight their kind of war. No honorable exchanges of fire at long range. No gradual escalation. We hit them hard, fast, and without warning. Maximum violence in minimum time." Walsh studied the plan. It was brutal, efficient, and absolutely ruthless. It was also the kind of strategy that had made humans the most feared species in their own history. The difference was that now they would be fighting to protect others instead of conquering them. "Deployment timeline?" she asked. "The fleet can jump to hyperspace within 2 hours," Turner reported. "Transit time to Kepler 442 is 72 hours. But Admiral, the Zephyrians will reach the system in 60 hours. Then we will be 12 hours late," Walsh said calmly. "Which means we will arrive during their attack on the refugee ships." Hamilton grinned again. "Perfect timing. They will be focused on their ground targets, not watching for threats from hyperspace." Walsh looked around the war room at her staff. These people understood what they were asking of the fleet. 50 ships against over 300. Conventional wisdom said it was suicide. But conventional wisdom had never accounted for human military doctrine. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All ships are to prepare for immediate deployment. Rules of engagement are simple. Any Zephyrian vessel that does not surrender immediately is to be destroyed. No warnings, no quarter, no hesitation." Turner looked uncertain. "Admiral, the galactic community might consider such tactics excessive." Walsh turned to face him, and her expression was cold as space itself. "Lieutenant Commander, in approximately 72 hours, the galaxy is going to learn why humans are the only species that has never lost a war. They can judge our tactics after we save their civilizations." As the orders went out across the fleet, 50 human warships began their final preparations. Crews ran battle drills, engineers checked weapon systems, and captains reviewed attack plans that would have horrified peaceful galactic species. The Zephyrians had conquered 17 worlds by being stronger and more advanced than their enemies. They were about to discover that humans had spent 10 millennia learning that strength, and technology meant nothing compared to the willingness to do whatever was necessary to win. High Commander Veltash stood on the bridge of the Deathbringer and felt the familiar rush of victory approaching. The massive viewscreen showed the Kepler 442 system spread out before his fleet like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. Dozens of refugee ships hung in space around the fourth planet, packed with survivors from the worlds he had already conquered. Veltash was 7 feet tall with purple scales that caught the bridge lighting and threw it back in brilliant flashes. His species had evolved from apex predators, and every movement showed the deadly grace of a creature born to hunt. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 47 worlds under his command, and he had never encountered serious resistance. "Sub-Commander Zaktha," he called to his tactical officer. "Report on the refugee fleet." Zaktha was younger than his commander, with darker scales and nervous energy that came from serving under the most successful military leader in Zephyrian history. 73 vessels, High Commander. Mixed civilian transports, a few converted cargo ships, some outdated defense platforms. No significant military presence. Veltash nodded with satisfaction. "And their defensive capabilities? Minimal, sir. A handful of plasma cannons, some missile batteries that are at least 50 years old. They pose no threat to our fleet." The High Commander walked to the front of the bridge, his claws clicking on the metal deck. Behind him, 312 Zephyrian warships moved in perfect formation. Each ship bristled with plasma cannons, capable of turning continents into glass. The Deathbringer alone carried enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. "They always gather like this," Veltash mused to his bridge crew. "The survivors from conquered worlds. They think if they band together, they can somehow resist us. It never works." His communications officer, a female named Silandra, looked up from her console. "High Commander, we are receiving transmission requests from several refugee vessels. They appear to be asking for negotiation terms." Veltash laughed, a sound like grinding metal that echoed through the bridge. "Tell them we do not negotiate with prey. They can surrender their ships and prepare for transport to the labor camps, or they can die with their vessels. Those are the only options. In the detention cells deep within the Deathbringer, Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the small porthole and watched the refugee ships through the thick, transparent aluminum. She had been captured 3 months ago when New Geneva fell, and since then she had seen firsthand how the Zephyrians operated. Elena was a xenobiologist who had spent years studying different species across the galaxy. She understood alien psychology better than most humans, which made her current situation even more terrifying. The Zephyrians were not evil in any way that other species could understand. They were simply apex predators doing what came naturally to them, but they had made one critical mistake. They had never fought humans. Alina listened to the conversations of her guards, picking up fragments of tactical information. The Zephyrians were confident, almost bored with this latest conquest. They expected the refugee ships to surrender or die within hours. What they did not expect was interference from outside the system. Back on the bridge, Sub-Commander Zaktha reviewed sensor readings from the edge of the system. High Commander, long-range sensors are detecting hyperspace distortions. Multiple contacts approaching from galactic north. Veltash turned from the viewscreen. Reinforcements for the refugees? Unknown, sir. The signatures are unfamiliar, not matching any known galactic fleet configurations. Veltash moved to the tactical display. In his experience, the various galactic species all use similar ship designs and energy signatures. Plasma weapons, antimatter cores, gravitational shields. The technology varied, but the basic principles remained the same across all civilized races. Number and classification? He asked. Zaktha frowned at his readings. Approximately 50 vessels, sir. But the energy signatures are strange. Very low plasma emissions, minimal antimatter radiation. The computer is having difficulty classifying them as military vessels. 50 ships? Veltash laughed again. Even if they are military vessels, 50 against 300 is hardly a threat. What species? Computer indicates human origin, High Commander. The laughter died in Veltash's throat. He had heard of humans, of course. The newest species to join the galactic community, barely 50 years out of their home system. Their technology was considered primitive by galactic standards, their ships crude and functional rather than elegant. But something about them made him uneasy. Human military capabilities? He asked. Zaktha consulted his database. Limited, sir. No plasma weapons, no antimatter torpedoes, no gravitational disruptors. They use kinetic projectiles and conventional explosives. Their ships appear to be built for atmospheric flight as much as space operations. Veltash relaxed slightly. Kinetic weapons were what primitive species used before they developed proper energy systems. Solid projectiles were easily deflected by shields and armor. The humans might as well be throwing rocks. Estimated threat level? Minimal, High Commander. Our shields can easily absorb kinetic impacts. Their weapons lack the energy output to penetrate our defenses. But something nagged at Veltash. In 47 conquests, he had learned to trust his instincts. And his instincts were telling him that something was wrong with this picture. What do we know about human military history? He asked. Zaktha accessed the galactic database. They are a young species, High Commander. Only recently achieved interstellar travel. However, they have an unusual history of internal conflict. The database indicates they have been fighting wars continuously for their entire recorded history. Against each other? Yes, sir. Constant warfare between different human factions. The record suggests they have never experienced a prolonged period of peace. Veltash frowned. Most species went through a warlike phase early in their development, then evolved beyond it as they became more civilized. Humans appeared to be stuck in their primitive military phase, even after reaching the stars. Combat effectiveness against galactic standard opponents? Unknown, sir. They have engaged pirates and smugglers, but never faced a major military power. No data on their performance against proper warships. The High Commander studied the tactical display. 50 primitive ships against his proven fleet. By any reasonable measure, the humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Given their reputation for internal warfare, he suspected. It was stupidity. Signal the fleet, he ordered. Maintain formation and continue approach. When the human ships arrive, we will destroy them quickly and continue with the primary mission. I want the system cleared within 6 hours. Shall we attempt communication with the human vessels? Asked Silandra. Veltash considered this. Standard galactic protocol called for warnings before engaging unknown vessels. But he had stopped following galactic protocols when he began his conquest campaign. No warnings, he decided. Let them. See what happens to those who interfere with the Zephyrian Empire. Their destruction will serve as an example to other species who might consider resistance. As the Zephyrian fleet advanced toward the refugee ships, Veltash felt the familiar anticipation of battle. In a few hours, this system would be under his control. The refugees would be processed for the labor camps, and 50 human ships would be debris floating in space. He had no way of knowing that the approaching human fleet represented 10,000. Years of military evolution focused on a single principle: win at any cost. The Zephyrians were about to face an enemy that had never learned the meaning of civilized warfare. In her cell, Dr. Elena Vasquez smiled for the first time in 3 months. The cavalry was coming, and they had no idea what they were walking into. Captain Susan Blake stood on the bridge of the U.S. Liberty as reality twisted around her ship. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, 50 vessels appearing from nothing in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Blake was 45 years old, with steel-gray eyes that had seen combat in the asteroid wars and the Titan Rebellion. She did not waste time with speeches or hesitation. All ships, this is Liberty Actual, she transmitted on the fleet command. Frequency. Execute Alpha Strike on my mark. Target priorities are flagship and command vessels. Remember your training and bring everyone home. Commander Tony Martinez, her tactical officer, hunched over his displays like a predator studying prey. Martinez had grown up in the slums of New Detroit, where survival meant being faster and smarter than everyone else. Those skills had served him well in the military, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Enemy fleet is maintaining formation, Martinez reported. They are not taking evasive action. Flagship is broadcasting on open channels, probably demanding our surrender. Blake almost smiled. Are they still approaching the refugee ships? Yes, Captain. They appear to be ignoring us completely. The Zephyrian fleet spread across space in front of them like a metal constellation. Their ships were beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful, sleek, and deadly, and absolutely confident in their superiority. The Deathbringer dominated the formation, a 4-kilometer mountain of armor and weapons that could destroy planets. Range to target? Blake asked. 40,000 kilometers and closing, reported her navigation officer. Enemy shields are active, but they show no signs of charging weapons. Blake nodded. The Zephyrians were making the same mistake that had doomed every enemy humanity had ever faced. They were fighting the last war instead of the current one. Lieutenant Kim, status on electronic warfare? Lieutenant Sarah Kim looked up from her console. She was 26 years old and had spent her entire adult life learning how to break things that other people built. Computer systems, communication networks, targeting computers, it made no difference to her. If it ran on electricity, she could make it stop working. I have access to their communication grid, Kim reported. Their security is impressive, but they designed it to stop energy-based intrusion attempts. They were not expecting old-fashioned signal hacking. I can disrupt their coordination on your command. Blake checked her chronometer. In 30 seconds, the Zephyrian fleet would learn why humans were the only species that had never lost a war. The lesson would be brief and permanent. All ships weapons-free, she ordered. Target lock confirmed on priority vessels. Electronic warfare, execute on my mark. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of machinery and the quiet breathing of her crew. Blake had been in combat before, but never anything like this. 50 ships against over 300, with the fate of entire civilizations hanging in the balance. Mark, she said quietly, what happened next redefined space combat for every species in the galaxy. The UES, Liberty and her sister ships opened fire simultaneously. Instead of the gradual buildup of energy weapons that characterized galactic warfare, the humans unleashed coordinated volleys of tungsten rods, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The projectiles were invisible to the naked eye, detectable only as brief distortions in space itself. Martinez tracked the results with clinical precision. Direct hits on flagship. Multiple breaches in hull sections, 7 through 15. Enemy vessel is venting atmosphere and debris. The Deathbringer, pride of the Zephyrian fleet, staggered under impacts that its designers had never imagined. Energy shields that could deflect plasma beams and antimatter torpedoes were useless against solid matter traveling at relativistic speeds. The tungsten rods punched through the flagship's hull like bullets through paper. Secondary targets engaging, reported the weapons officer. 17 direct hits on capital ships. Enemy formation is breaking apart. At the same time, Lieutenant Kim unleashed her electronic warfare suite on the Zephyrian communication network. What she found was a system designed to resist jamming from energy weapons, but completely vulnerable to simple signal intrusion. She inserted carefully crafted data packets that turned the enemy's own computers against them. Enemy targeting systems are compromised, Kim announced with satisfaction. They are firing on their own vessels. Communication between ships has been severed. Blake watched the tactical display as the Zephyrian fleet dissolved into chaos. Ships that had maintained perfect formation for centuries suddenly found themselves blind and confused. Some fired at phantom targets created by Kim's electronic warfare. Others tried to retreat but collided with their own vessels. Time elapsed since first shot? Blake asked. 4 seconds, Captain, Martinez replied. 4 seconds. In 4 seconds, the human fleet had destroyed or disabled over half of the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The Zephyrians were not just losing. They were being annihilated by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive. Captain Blake, came a transmission from the UES Constitution. We have secondary explosions. Across the enemy flagship, hull breach is expanding. That ship will not survive another minute. Blake nodded grimly. High Commander Veltash had built his reputation on overwhelming firepower and superior technology. He had never faced an enemy that ignored the rules of civilized warfare and simply focused on killing as efficiently as possible. All ships, continue firing, she ordered. Any vessel that attempts to flee is to be destroyed. Any vessel that surrenders will be boarded and secured. The slaughter continued for another 4 seconds before the first Zephyrian ship managed to transmit a surrender signal. Then another. Then dozens more as the surviving crews realized that their technological superiority meant nothing against an enemy that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. Martinez looked up from his displays with something approaching awe. Captain, enemy fleet strength is down to less than 40%. Most of their command vessels are destroyed or disabled. The flagship is breaking apart. Blake activated the fleet communication system. Attention Zephyrian vessels. This is Captain Susan Blake of the Earth Defense Force. Any ship that surrenders immediately will be treated according to galactic law. Any ship that continues hostilities will be destroyed. You have 30 seconds to decide. The response was immediate. Surrender signals flooded the communication channels as Zephyrian crews abandoned any thought of continued resistance. In less than 10 seconds, an empire that had conquered 47 worlds had been reduced to scattered survivors begging for mercy. "Kim, restore their communication systems," Blake ordered. "Let them coordinate their surrenders." As the Zephyrian fleet powered down weapons and dropped shields, Blake allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The battle was over, but the implications would reshape the galaxy for generations. The human fleet had not just won a victory. They had demonstrated that 10,000 years of continuous warfare had created something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that had evolved beyond civilized combat into something far more deadly. The refugees in the Kepler system were safe. The Zephyrian Empire was broken. And every species in the galaxy now understood that humans were not the primitive newcomers they had appeared to be. They were the most dangerous military force in known space. And they had just announced their arrival. High Commander Veltash sat in the medical bay of the human vessel UE's Liberty, staring at his bandaged claws with eyes that had lost all their former confidence. The proud Zephyrian leader who had conquered 47 worlds now looked like what he truly was, a beaten enemy trying to understand how his empire had crumbled in 8 seconds. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood nearby, no longer a prisoner but now serving as a translator and cultural advisor. She had been rescued from the wreckage of the Deathbringer along with 3,000 other survivors. The massive flagship that had been the symbol of Zephyrian power was now a slowly expanding cloud of debris. "I do not understand," Veltash said for the 20th time. His translator made his words sound hollow and confused. "Our shields were active. Our weapons were charged. How did your primitive kinetic weapons penetrate our defenses?" Elena sat down across from him, her expression mixing professional curiosity with personal satisfaction. She had spent 3 months in Zephyrian custody, watching them destroy entire civilizations. Now she had a chance to explain why their reign of terror was over. "Your shields were designed to stop energy weapons," she said patiently. "Plasma beams, particle cannons, antimatter torpedoes. All the weapons that civilized species use. But humans have never been civilized in the way you understand the term." Veltash looked up at her with genuine confusion. "But kinetic weapons are primitive. Solid projectiles cannot match the power of pure energy." Elena smiled grimly. "You are thinking like a galactic citizen. Humans think like predators. When we discovered that other species used energy shields, we did not try to build better energy weapons. We built better projectiles and learned to throw them faster." "But the mathematics do not work," Veltash protested. "Simple kinetic energy cannot generate the damage we witnessed." "Simple kinetic energy, no," Elena agreed. "But tungsten rods traveling at 70% of light speed carry enough energy to level cities. Your shields were not designed to stop solid matter at relativistic velocities because no civilized species would waste resources on such crude weapons." The medical bay doors opened and Captain Susan Blake entered, followed by Commander Martinez. Blake looked tired but satisfied. In the 6 hours since the battle, she had been coordinating the surrender of over 100 Zephyrian vessels and arranging medical care for thousands of wounded aliens. "High Commander," Blake said formally, "I need to discuss terms for the surviving members of your fleet." Veltash struggled to his feet, his massive frame still impressive despite his defeat. "I am prepared to accept responsibility for my actions. My crews were following orders. They should not be punished for my decisions." Blake nodded approvingly. Even in defeat, the Zephyrian leader was trying to protect his people. "Your crews will be treated according to galactic law. Medical care for the wounded, repatriation for those who wish to return home, and trials for those who committed war crimes, and myself. That depends on you," Blake replied. The Galactic Council wants you to face trial for the destruction of 17 worlds and the deaths of billions of sentients. I cannot change that. But you can help determine what happens to your empire. Veltash considered this. What do you mean? Commander Martinez stepped forward with a datapad. Intelligence reports indicate that your empire controls over 200 worlds. Most of them joined voluntarily before your military expansion began. They are not responsible for your recent conquests. You want me to order them to surrender, Veltash said. We want you to prevent a galactic war, Blake corrected. Right now, every major military power in the galaxy is mobilizing their fleets. They saw what happened here, and they are terrified. Some want to ally with humanity for protection. Others want to attack us before we become a threat to them. Elena leaned forward. The galaxy has been at peace for centuries, Commander. They do not know how to handle the kind of military force that humans represent. If this escalates into open warfare, billions more will die. Veltash was quiet for a long moment. Through the medical bay's viewport, he could see human ships moving among the wreckage of his fleet, rescuing survivors and securing prisoners. The efficiency was impressive and terrifying. These humans fought like machines, but they showed mercy like civilized beings. What assurances do I have that my people will be treated fairly? He asked finally. Blake activated her communication device. This is Captain Blake. Patch me through to Fleet Admiral Walsh on Earth. The connection took several seconds to establish across interstellar distances. When Admiral Walsh's face appeared on the screen, she looked as tired as Blake, but equally determined. Admiral, Blake said formally. High Commander Veltash wishes to discuss surrender terms for the Zephyrian Empire. Walsh studied the alien leader through the screen. High Commander, I will be direct. Humanity did not ask for this war, but we will finish it. The question is whether we finish it through negotiation or through force. Veltash straightened to his full height. What are your terms? Complete withdrawal from all conquered territories. Reparations to the worlds you destroyed. Dismantling of your military fleet. And your personal surrender to the Galactic Council for trial. And in return, your remaining worlds keep their independence. Your people are not enslaved or relocated. Your culture and government continue to exist under galactic oversight. Veltash looked around the medical bay at the human crew members working to save Zephyrian lives. These were not the primitive savages he had expected. They were something far more dangerous, civilized beings who retained the killing instincts of their ancestors. I accept your terms, he said quietly. 3 days later, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Hughes Harmony as he watched refugee ships beginning their journey home. The Kepler system that had been a gathering point for displaced populations was now a symbol of hope. The Zephyrian threat was over, and the galaxy was slowly returning to peace. Captain, his communications officer reported, we are receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. They are requesting a formal meeting to discuss humanity's role in galactic security, Morrison smiled. 6 months ago, the galactic community had barely acknowledged human existence. Now they wanted humanity to serve as peacekeepers and protectors. Tell them we will consider their request, he replied. But make it clear that any agreement will be on human terms. As the Hughes Harmony set course for Nexus Prime, Morrison reflected on what had changed. Humanity had revealed itself to be the most effective military force in known space, but they had also demonstrated restraint and mercy in victory. The galaxy was learning that humans could be trusted with power because they understood its proper use. The age of Zephyrian conquest was over. The age of human protection had begun. And across hundreds of worlds, civilizations that had lived in fear could finally sleep peacefully, knowing that if threats emerged, the human fleet would arrive. And the battle would be over in seconds.